The Shaman Origin of the Emperor. How credible is it when you look at the many years of lore that have followed on from its initial reveal? I found evidence and paralleled the origin with later lore to help us examine this. So what is that origin? To start with, since the first primitive humans evolved, the species had developed a special relationship with the warp. The simple hunters and harvesters of early times recognized the natural forces which flowed through all living things like a great river of life, bringing sustenance to the dead earth. Some of these early humans were more sensitive than others to the hidden movements of the warp. They could sense the rhythm of the warp as its energies moved through living things, and sometimes they could predict the future by means of variations in the flow of warp energy. The most successful of these humans assumed the role of shaman or tribal witch and used their powers to benefit their people. Now, it's worth noting that the shaman style use of the powers of the warp can be seen in the Storm Seers of the Great Khan's chapter, and also amongst the Rune Priests of the Space Wolves. Now, regarding the White Scars, they seem to have a different approach, a safer way with the warp perhaps. Could this natural approach to it tell us how the shaman operated? In calmer times with the warp, obviously. Those who serve the Great Khan are called the Storm Seers. Yasugai works with the Khan. He explores their approach to this after the Edict of Nicaea when speaking with the Salamander. It as I told you, Magnus never wanted Librarius. He wants every psyker to unlock his full potential. Explore it all, he says. No restraint, no guidance. They had tutelaries fluttering in their ears and speaking to them. Though we did not see it, it was dangerous. It needed to be curbed. So the Khan and the angels both created structure. They limit what psykers can do. On Chikoris, we call it the path of heaven. Stray from it, we tell them, and the warp will eat your soul. So you knew it was dangerous? Of course. Was it not dangerous? Your Promethean creed is dangerous. Being alive in the universe is dangerous. We balance on a narrow ledge. There were those who thought we are witches, ripe for burning, and those who thought we are gods. Neither could be allowed to win the argument. Learn and use the power, but within limits. Later Yasugai thinks on this. Then he smiled to himself. Even he was capable of weakness, of the human vice of just a little further. That was the root of it all this damnation, the satiation of curiosity, the pushing into the darkness. There was no unlearning it. It was written into the genetics of every one of them, the seeds of species destruction, as permanent and furtive as a virus. So even as experienced as Yasugai was in limiting himself, he would still get drawn in to the temptation to know just a little more, which is the biggest trap that the warp sets for you, and why Magnus was doomed, because he was too arrogant to think that there might be forces even he cannot control, that nothing is out of his reach. So I think some of that could apply to the early shamans, and now back to the shaman origin. As human numbers increased and human civilization grew away from its natural roots, the particular warp energies created by humans began to dominate the warp. Where the energies of nature were harmonious and benign, those of man were often disharmonious and dangerous. Power, ambition, greed, lust, and 1,000 other human feelings took root in the warp and began to grow. As the thoughts and emotions of men became stronger, the natural rhythms of the warp were disrupted and became less accessible to the shamans. Inevitably, the process of civilization severed mankind's links with the natural forces of the warp and created new ones based upon his own character, shaped them and made them in our image, our darkest aspects, anger, violence, etc. In time, these disharmonious forces were to grow into the chaos powers. The Emperor was born while the rhythm of the warp still flowed strongly through all natural things. The old shamans were guided by the warp, and in their turn guided their people, but even then the growing power of humanity was beginning to make itself felt, and the shamans feared that their knowledge and whole way of life could eventually pass away. I like the idea how the people been born, increasing the population, and how that is linked to making things worse in the warp. If you look at it this way, each life adds to its shape. The energies they depended upon were becoming increasingly difficult to tap. Worst of all, they were losing their ability to reincarnate. For as long as anyone could remember, when a shaman died, his soul had flown into the warp and bathed in it, its energies, awaiting renewal in another body, finding some way back to our world, where souls are made and linked to the materium. A natural process of the 40k verse and the links between those two parts, the materium and the immaterium, I believe. Now the souls were being chased and consumed by the malignant chaos powers. Terrified for the future of their race, all the shamans of Earth gathered in one place and began the longest and most important debate in the history of humanity, lasting centuries and leading to the birth of the new man. After hundreds of years of debate and research, the shamans came to the conclusion that they were doomed, and that without them the whole race would soon fall prey to the psychic entities it had created in the warp. At the same time, the destruction of the natural rhythm of the warp would result in the inevitable decline of the whole planet. They divined a future when all of creation would be consumed by mankind's greed and ambition. Although their own power was still strong, the shamans realized that they could survive for only one or two further incarnations. They were not men to accept death easily. Many of them could remember the dawn of their race, when in other bodies they had walked under African skies. Having survived so long, for millions of years, it was not their way to die without hope of purpose. They therefore decided to pool their own energies by reincarnating in a single body, and think of all that knowledge gathered over so long that the Emperor could use when he's born. In their thousands they sacrificed themselves to become one, and within a year the man, later to be known as the Emperor, was born. As he grew older, his powers began to manifest themselves, and he gradually remembered the thousands of lives that lay behind him. But he was also the past, and thinks about seeing the dark future of humanity, and after caring for humanity in his past shaman lives, how would this drive him to recognize chaos as the enemy to defeat, and how he would do this for the love of humanity. And he remembered how he was made to live forever, so that he would never have to reincarnate, but would survive unchanged for eternity. Perhaps some aspect of this, we could say, came out in his perpetual ability, where he can recover from horrific wounds such as enduring on the throne for 10,000 years. At last he remembered everything that had led up to his birth, and he left his own people to begin his endless journey around the world and throughout human history. Now, if this is true, what evidence can we draw to support this? I would like to look at the many dead souls of the shamans reincarnating in the form of the Emperor. We know to a degree that the Eldari were able to reincarnate into new bodies pre-Slanesh, but how do the dead souls, given for the Emperor's power, given that psychic ability, that high level of calling on the warp? With the dead souls of the Eldari, they are gathered within the matrix of a craft world in an infinity circuit. Within it the dead live on in a group conscious. They also provide a lot of psychic energy for the craft world to call upon. We can also see this power within Eldari world spirit, where the souls of the dead Eldari are stored, as well as having a massive power to call on, so that could work within the framework of the Emperor himself. That's where he has all his power. Apply that to the Master of Mankind. He's made from the souls of dead shamans, who will have a link to mind, and he will after his rebirth as well. We also know he is a very powerful psyker, which again would link with the many sacrifices of the shamans. There are also some other aspects of the Emperor that might work into this origin, such as when he speaks with many voices to Bruta Gilliman after his return from death, or when he speaks to Sanguinius when they first meet. Both show different opinions when the Emperor speaks psychically, and though it could be explained another way, the thoughts of a Gestalt psychic mind might have that aspect. But for myself, with that part, I put the Bruta little chat down to the Biggie's fractured mind, and the Sanguinius catch-up seems more like how he communicates through telepathy, where the words are layered in their meaning, with one phrase having many deeper and related meanings. So I think the Shaman Origin still works, though as more of part of a larger origin, and can be supported by the in-world law. If you enjoyed this video, look at the Biggie in this one as well.